Ever had your dreams crushed by an HOA? What if you could turn their demands into your greatest victory? In this story, I was told my lawn wasn't green enough. But what I did next, well, let's just say it shocked the entire neighborhood. Stick around till the end to find out how I turned my yard into the talk of the town against the HOA's will. Stick around until the end of this video to find out how this incredible story unfolds, how one homeowner stood up to the power of his HOA, and what happened when he fought back in a way that no one expected. Trust me, you won't believe the shocking turn of events that led to his ultimate victory. Thank you so much for your comment. I really appreciate it. If you want to support us, it only takes a second to leave a like and subscribe. It really helps the channel grow and motivates me to bring you even more amazing stories. Now, let's dive into the crucial details of this insane HOA showdown. Samantha Blake Lovefall. Every year, as soon as the first leaf hit the sidewalk and the air turned crisp enough for a scarf, her heart would leap. There was something about the season, the warmth of cinnamon, the golden sunlight filtering through orange leaves, the soft crunch of acorns underfoot, that made her feel alive. But more than anything, she loved Halloween. Every October, the front yard of her cozy suburban home in Maple Hollow transformed into a pumpkin paradise. It started with just a few scattered gourds near the steps, then slowly grew into a whimsical sprawl of jack-o'-lanterns, hay bales, scarecrows, and glowing lights. Her two kids, Jake, 8, and Ella, 10, would help her every weekend, painting faces on pumpkins, stringing up lights, and building foam tombstones that said things like, "Here lies homework," and "Rest in pieces." This year, she went big, bigger than ever before. "I want to break our pumpkin record," Jake shouted, holding a mini pumpkin in each hand. Samantha smiled as she looked out over the lawn. There were already 87 pumpkins. Some were real, some were plastic, and others were foam replicas she collected over the years. This year, she bought 40 more from a local farm. It was an explosion of orange across her lawn, some stacked in pyramids, others carved into silly faces that lit up with candles every night. Neighbors often stopped by to admire the decorations. Kids from other streets made it a ritual to walk past every day on their way to school. One little girl once whispered, "It's like walking through a Halloween wonderland." Samantha had never forgotten that. So, when an envelope came in the mail, she thought it was just another coupon from the HOA or an invitation to the community potluck. But it wasn't. The letter inside was printed on thick ivory paper with the Maple Hollow Homeowners Association seal at the top. Notice of infraction. Dear Ms. Blake, it has come to our attention that the current state of your lawn decoration for the fall season is in violation of Article 6, Section 2B of the Maple Hollow HOA guidelines regarding seasonal lawn displays. Specifically, excessive quantity of decorations, obstruction of natural lawn visibility, and overuse of thematic objects, i.e. pumpkins. You are required to reduce the number of visible pumpkins and seasonal objects to comply with neighborhood aesthetic standards. Failure to do so will result in a $500 fine and further disciplinary action. Sincerely, Margaret Griggs, President, Maple Hollow HOA. Samantha read it twice, then laughed out loud. Too many pumpkins? Is that a thing? Jake peeked over his shoulder and frowned. Are they mad about the pumpkins? Samantha shook her head, still stunned. Apparently, yes. What are you going to do, Mom? She folded the letter slowly. I'm going to talk to them. That's what I'm going to do. She didn't know then that this small letter would ignite the biggest neighborhood showdown Maple Hollow had ever seen. Samantha didn't sleep well that night. The words from the letter replayed in her mind like a broken record. Too many pumpkins, $500 fine, disciplinary action. It was absurd. She wasn't creating a safety hazard. She wasn't blocking traffic or blaring music. She was celebrating Halloween, joyfully, passionately, and in a way that made kids smile. Since when had pumpkins become offensive? The next morning, she dressed in her most diplomatic outfit. Jeans, a cozy sweater, and a bright orange scarf with tiny jack-o'-lanterns embroidered along the edges. She looked festive but approachable, coffee in hand, and the HOA letter tucked into her tote bag. She walked 3 blocks to the Maple Hollow Community Center. The HOA office sat in a converted conference room just past the indoor pool. It smelled faintly of chlorine and bureaucracy. Margaret Griggs was already waiting behind the front desk when Samantha arrived. Tall and severe with silver-streaked hair tied into a tight bun, Margaret looked like she hadn't smiled since 1994. "Ms. Blake," Margaret said flatly without standing, "do you have an appointment?" Samantha raised an eyebrow. "I wasn't aware I needed one to discuss a letter you sent to my home." Margaret gestured to a chair. "You have 5 minutes." "Samantha, Saturday. I wanted to talk about the fine. The pumpkins." "There are too many," Margaret replied without missing a beat. "The community guidelines are clear." Samantha pulled the paper from her bag. "It says I'm violating aesthetic standards. But who decides what's aesthetic? People walk past my house just to take pictures. It brings joy. How is that a problem?" Margaret's lips thinned. "Joy is not part of the regulation criteria." Samantha blinked. "Seriously? You've obstructed natural lawn visibility, cluttered your frontage, and set a precedent that encourages seasonal excess." "Seasonal excess?" Samantha scoffed. "They're pumpkins, not pyrotechnics." Margaret remained unmoved. "Remove the excess pumpkins or the fine stands. Further noncompliance may result in daily penalties." The absurdity of it all boiled in Samantha's chest. Is this what the HOA is for? Policing pumpkins and crushing community spirit? Margaret leaned forward slightly. "We preserve order and property values. Sentimentality is not a governance strategy." That was it. Samantha stood, gathering her things. "You're right. Sentimentality isn't strategy. But community is. And you've clearly forgotten what that means." Outside, Samantha took a deep breath. The fall air was cooler now, her breath visible in the wind. The pumpkins were waiting. Her kids were waiting. This wasn't just about Halloween anymore. It was about standing up. She pulled out her phone, opened the Maple Hollow Facebook group, and typed, "Pumpkin Gate is real. Hi, neighbors. I've just been fined $500 for decorating my yard with too many pumpkins. Apparently, we're now enforcing rules about aesthetic overload. I always thought Halloween was about community, creativity, and joy, but I guess the HOA disagrees. What do you think? Hashtag pumpkin too much. Hashtag stand with pumpkins." She hit post. The comment section exploded in minutes. First came the laughing emojis, then the "what the heck" replies. Then came the neighbors. "I walk past your house every day. My kids love your pumpkins. Those decorations are the only fun thing on this street." Margaret strikes again. Even local businesses chimed in. Maple Hollow Cafe. "We'll donate a PSL for every pumpkin." Go Samantha. A small tide was turning. That evening, when Samantha returned home from picking up Ella from gymnastics, she found 3 new pumpkins on her porch. No note, just gifts. The next morning, 5 more appeared. By Friday, there were 40 extra pumpkins. The HOA wanted fewer pumpkins. Maple Hollow had other plans. By the following week, Samantha's house had become something of a local attraction. Parents brought their children in wagons. Teenagers snapped selfies in front of her porch. A local news reporter even stopped by to get footage for a feel-good segment titled, "Pumpkin Rebellion Grows in Suburbia." The lawn now featured over 200 pumpkins, some big, some small, some stacked into creative towers or carved into intricate designs. Neighbors had started contributing more than just pumpkins. There were strings of fairy lights, spooky skeletons, even a fog machine someone anonymously left on her doorstep. Samantha hadn't expected this. All she wanted was to celebrate Halloween without interference. But now, she was leading an unintentional movement. It didn't sit well with Margaret Griggs. The HOA sent a second letter, then a third. By the 4th, the fines had reached $1,500. Samantha didn't pay. She had printed each one and displayed them proudly in her front window, right next to a 30-pound pumpkin named Margaret. The final straw came on a Thursday afternoon. As Samantha watered the mums by her front steps, she heard shouting. A group of HOA board members, led by Margaret herself, were walking up the sidewalk with clipboards in hand and expressions like thunderclouds. "Ms. Blake," Margaret announced, "we are here to enforce compliance." Samantha folded her arms. "With what?" "Halloween." "With order," Margaret snapped. The group began measuring pumpkins and taking photographs. One board member, a wiry man named Ted, tripped over a glow-in-the-dark skeleton and landed in a pile of hay. A child passing by on a scooter giggled. Samantha looked around. Cameras were already out. Neighbors had gathered. Phones were filming. This wasn't going to end quietly. "Margaret," Samantha said, "do you really want to be known as the woman who shut down Halloween?" Margaret ignored her and gestured to the others. "Document everything." And that's when Samantha had an idea. She climbed onto her porch and pulled out a megaphone, one she'd borrowed from a local marching band. "Attention, Maple Hollow," she called out. Apparently, celebrating Halloween now comes with a price tag, but we're not backing down. Because this, she waved a hand over the pumpkins, the lights, the laughter, nearby children. "This is what a community looks like." The crowd cheered. Margaret's face turned a dangerous shade of red. That night, the HOA called an emergency meeting. Samantha wasn't invited, but word traveled fast. Some board members had expressed concern about the optics. Others argued that Samantha was making a mockery of their rules. Meanwhile, donations poured in to cover Samantha's fines. A GoFundMe page titled "Pumpkins for Peace" hit $5,000 within 2 days. Local news picked up the story again. One paper's headline read, "Gourd of War, Suburban Mom Takes on HOA and Wins Hearts." By Halloween night, Samantha's house was a spectacle. There were over 500 pumpkins. Live music played on her lawn. Volunteers handed out cider and donuts. Families from all over town came to see what the fuss was about. And Margaret? She stayed home. The next week, the HOA quietly dropped all charges. The official statement cited an outpouring of public support and a need to reevaluate seasonal decoration policies. Samantha never received another letter. In the end, all she wanted was a holiday filled with magic for her kids. What she got was a reminder that standing up for joy is sometimes the most powerful thing you can do. And the pumpkins? They stayed up until Thanksgiving. Just because the pumpkins may have withered, but the spark they ignited in Maple Hollow was just beginning to glow. By Thanksgiving, Samantha Blake found herself at the center of something she hadn't planned, a movement. What started as an innocent act of defiance had snowballed into a symbol of unity, resilience, and joy. Neighbors who had barely waved at each other before were now swapping recipes, building decorations together, and, perhaps most shocking, publicly questioning the HOA's authority. And then came the idea. It was Priya again, carrying her signature pumpkin pie, who brought it up at a community potluck hosted on Samantha's driveway. "Have you ever thought of doing this again next year? But bigger?" she asked, setting down her dish. Samantha chuckled. "Next year? I haven't even finished composting the last batch of pumpkins." "I'm serious," Priya insisted. "This wasn't just a Halloween display. It was a message. You brought the neighborhood back to life." That phrase stuck with Samantha. Back to life. Over the next few weeks, people approached her with ideas. Joe, from across the street, wanted to volunteer as band for next year's event. Anita, the local baker, proposed setting up a food truck rally. Teens from a nearby high school offered to help with setup and even suggested haunted house routes. It became clear this wasn't just about pumpkins anymore. It was about reclaiming joy. One chilly December morning, Samantha found herself sipping hot cocoa while sketching out ideas on a legal pad. Not because she had to, but because she wanted to. For the first time in years, she felt like she had purpose outside of routines and responsibilities. Her simple act of rebellion had inspired something bigger, so she leaned into it. She began organizing the Hollow Festival Project, an unofficial community group aimed at planning seasonal events of the town. Winter lights, spring garden shows, summer movie nights, and of course, the grand return of Pumpkin Rebellion. But the HOA wasn't pleased. A formal letter arrived shortly after New Year's. This time, it wasn't about pumpkins. It was about unauthorized community organizing. Dear Ms. Blake, it has come to our attention that you are promoting community events without HOA oversight or approval. Such actions risk undermining community cohesion and are in direct violation of Bylaw 7.4a. We ask that you cease all event planning immediately until formal authorization is requested and granted. Sincerely, Margaret Griggs, President, Maple Hollow HOA. Samantha stared at the letter for a full minute before bursting into laughter. It was so absurd, she couldn't help it. She posted the letter, just like she had the fines, on her living room window. Only this time, she added a sticky note below it. Rebellion is just another word for community love. The message went viral. By spring, the Hollow Festival Project had its own Instagram page, TikTok following, and was featured in a local podcast called Small Town, Big Feels. And the HOA, they were floundering. Their rigid rules suddenly felt outdated, and Margaret's iron grip began to loosen. Several board members resigned. A recall vote was whispered about at neighborhood brunches. But Samantha wasn't interested in power. She was interested in people. The woman who just wanted a festive front yard had become the voice of forgotten truth. Rules without kindness are cages. And the people of Maple Hollow were ready to fly. By early spring, the HOA's grip on Maple Hollow began to loosen. Not with a bang, but with whispers. It started in quiet corners of book clubs, over lawn chairs during garage sales, and in the back rows of church socials. The rebellion wasn't loud, at least not at first, but it was steady. People were fed up, and for the first time, they weren't afraid to admit it. And Samantha, she was at the center, not as a politician, but as a symbol, not a leader in the traditional sense, but someone who had lit the match. The letter Margaret had sent, demanding that she stop organizing events, had backfired spectacularly. Parents, teachers, retirees, people from all backgrounds rallied around Samantha. They weren't just defending Halloween anymore. They were defending their right to be neighbors, to be human. At a town meeting in April, normally a sparsely attended affair, the Maple Hollow Community Center was packed. People stood shoulder to shoulder, some fanning themselves with old HOA newsletters, others murmuring excitedly. Samantha sat near the front, unsure of what was about to happen. She wasn't even on the agenda. But then, a voice in the back. I motioned for a vote to recall the current HOA president. Gasps. Whispers turned to murmurs. Murmurs into murmured agreements. Hands started to rise. Margaret Griggs, seated on the stage with her ever-immaculate folder, blinked rapidly. This is irregular, she snapped. This isn't how things are done. It's in the bylaws, someone else said. Page 12. Recall vote. Community quorum. Samantha hadn't planned for this. She didn't want to be president, but the crowd had other ideas. We want Samantha. She listens. She doesn't fine people for bird feeders. That night, the vote was called. Margaret tried to stall. She claimed the motion wasn't valid, but she was overruled by her own board. When the final tally came in, 83% of the community had voted for recall. Samantha sat in stunned silence. So what happens now? She asked. A kind-eyed older man named Walter, who had served on the board for 10 years, leaned over. Now, he said, grinning, now we give the town back to the people. The vote changed everything. By the following week, Margaret Griggs had formally stepped down. Her meticulously labeled file folders were packed into cardboard boxes and carted off like dusty relics of a bygone era. Her final statement, a stiff 2-paragraph note about respect for order and tradition, was pinned to bulletin board in the community center. No one read it twice. And Samantha? Well, technically she wasn't HOA president. Not yet. That would require another vote. But to the people of Maple Hollow, titles didn't matter. She was their voice, their heartbeat. Her porch, once known for its ever-growing pumpkin army, had now become a headquarters of sorts. People dropped by not complain, but to dream. They brought ideas scrawled on napkins, drawings from their kids, offers of help. A group of teenagers wanted to set up a free library. A retired builder offered to design better community signs. Even a few former HOA members, now unshackled from Margaret's tyranny, stopped by with humble pies, both literal and metaphorical. One night, as Samantha sat with Priya, Joe, and a few others around a bonfire, they made a decision that would change the soul of Maple Hollow. "Let's rewrite the rule book," Joe said, marshmallow stick in hand. Literally, from scratch. They called it the Maple Hollow Neighbors Charter, a new, simplified set of community guidelines written by the residents for the residents. It would focus not on control, but cooperation, not punishment, but participation. The new charter had just 10 simple points, including celebrate diversity. Homes may express personal culture, tradition, and joy respectfully and freely. Green is good, but so is wild. Natural landscaping and gardens are encouraged. Seasonal spirit welcome. Holiday decorations are permitted and embraced. Community over compliance. Friendly conversations come before fines. Support local. Events that boost community and local business will be prioritized. Let the kids play. Sidewalk chalk, tree forts, lemonade stands? Go for it. Peace and privacy. Respect for all neighbors' peace, space, and lifestyle. Transparent decisions. Board meetings open to all. No closed-door votes. Volunteer, not dictate. HOA roles are service-based, not authoritarian. We are Maple Hollow. Every resident has a voice. No exceptions. The charter was printed, posted online, and left in every mailbox in the neighborhood. Then came the town vote. It was a sunny Sunday when the neighborhood gathered at the park. Children ran in circles with face paint. Dogs wore bandanas. There were food trucks, music, and laughter in the air. When Samantha took the stage, reluctantly, nervously, she looked out over the smiling crowd and simply said, "This isn't about me. It's about us. About making this place feel like home again." The new charter passed with over 90% approval. Samantha wasn't just voted in as HOA president. She was declared community connector, a new title created just for her. It came with no pay, no power, and all the responsibility in the world. And she couldn't have been happier, because finally, Maple Hollow wasn't just a place people lived. It was a place people belonged. By the time the sun warmed Maple Hollow into early June, something had shifted in the soul of the town. You could see it in the way people waved to each other, in how porches were no longer just extensions of homes, but gathering spaces, in the sound of kids laughing long after dinner time, playing flashlight tag in the open. And it was all leading up to the biggest test of the new charter yet, the Maple Hollow Summer Celebration. What started as a suggestion during one of Samantha's weekly community coffee chats turned into a full-blown event, a 2-day celebration of everything the town had become and was still becoming. The plan? A street fair that stretched across Main Street, a music stage built by volunteers, local artists showcasing their work, food trucks serving everything from birria tacos to vegan cupcakes, lawn games, face painting, a dunk tank, with Joe volunteering himself as the first donkey, and at the center of it all, a booth marked simply, "Your voice, your idea." Residents could submit ideas for future projects. Kids scribble with crayons. Grandparents proposed jazz nights. A middle schooler even submitted a design for a community skate park. But not everyone was thrilled. A small faction of old guard HOA loyalists had remained quiet since the charter vote, but they saw the summer celebration as frivolous, wasteful, unnecessary. "It's a distraction," murmured Helen Fox, one of Margaret's old allies, to her small circle. "Festivals don't mow lawns or trim hedges." But this wasn't about lawns anymore. On the first day of the festival, Samantha arrived early with folding chairs and iced coffee in hand. She watched as neighbors arrived with toolboxes, tents, balloons, and signs. The energy? Electric. By noon, it was undeniable. Maple Hollow was more alive than it had been in decades. Margaret herself showed up near sunset, standing stiffly at the edge of the crowd with arms crossed. She didn't say anything, just watched. That's when Ethan, Samantha's son, walked up to her. He was 9, missing a front tooth, and wearing a Mini Mayor T-shirt. "Hi, Miss Griggs," he said. "Want a pumpkin cookie?" For a moment, something in Margaret softened. She didn't take the cookie, but she did smile ever so slightly. That night, Samantha stood on the small stage beneath a canopy of string lights and maple trees. She looked out at the hundreds of people who had come together to reclaim joy, community, and choice. "This is what happens," she said into the mic, "when we stop being afraid of each other, when we stop being afraid of color, music, mass creativity, and let people live." The crowd cheered. Fireflies danced in the air like confetti. And for the first time since the HOA had tried to fine her for a few too many pumpkins, Samantha felt something she hadn't in a long, long time. Peace. Not just the quiet kind, but the loud, beautiful, imperfect kind that comes from real connection. And Maple Hollow? It wasn't just surviving change. It was thriving in it. Despite the overwhelming success of the Maple Hollow Summer Celebration, not everyone was celebrating. As summer progressed, whispers grew louder. The old guard, though still loyal to the previous HOA regime, wasn't finished just yet. They didn't understand how a simple group of residents could take down the institution they had built, or what it meant for their vision of order, control, and conformity. The small faction of disgruntled homeowners, led by Margaret's longtime ally Helen Fox, decided it was time to reclaim what they believed was the true spirit of Maple Hollow. And so, behind closed doors, they began to rally. They met at Helen's house, and their meetings became a secretive operation, a battle for the soul of the neighborhood. "This isn't just about pumpkins or festivals," Helen said during one of their covert gatherings. "This is about the future of our community. We can't let it evolve into chaos." The battle lines were drawn, but this time, things were different. Samantha had made it clear to the community that the festival wasn't just a one-off event. It was a beginning of something bigger, a vision for a Maple Hollow that could breathe and grow without the suffocating hands of bureaucracy. And people were on board. They had tasted the freedom of self-expression, the joy of a neighborhood that felt alive. But now, the stakes were higher. One Wednesday afternoon, a notice was posted at the community center. Town hall meeting, special election to revise Maple Hollow's bylaws. The title alone struck fear into the hearts of those who had embraced the spirit of change. An emergency meeting to rewrite the bylaws could only mean one thing: a pushback from the old guard. Samantha received the invitation too, but she wasn't afraid. She had already made up her mind that no matter the outcome of this meeting, she would fight for what she believed in. The community had already voted for change, and she wasn't about to let a few disgruntled neighbors undo everything. The town hall was packed as expected. The energy in the room was tense, charged with opposing forces. On one side, the old guard, people like Helen and a few other HOA stalwarts, looking stiff and formal in their polo shirts, armed with their notes and talking points. On the other side, the residents who had become part of the Hollow Festival project, their enthusiasm palpable. When the meeting began, Margaret Griggs was nowhere to be found. It seemed that her absence was no accident. The old guard wasn't looking to reestablish her authority. They wanted a new leader, someone who could stop the festival frenzy. Someone who could reinstate the bylaws that govern the community with an iron fist. Helen stood first, her expression as tight as ever. She spoke calmly but firmly. "The events we've seen in this community, on the guise of freedom, are dangerous. Our streets, our homes, our very sense of order is under siege. We cannot allow this to continue. I'm proposing a vote to restore the original HOA structure and reinstate fines for unapproved community events." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Samantha, standing in the back of the room, could see the looks of disbelief and frustration on the faces of her neighbors. They had fought too hard for this. Too much had changed. The community wasn't the same, and neither was the spirit that had come alive. Samantha stood up, her heart pounding. She knew it was time. "I move that we vote on whether or not this town continues to live in the shadow of rules, or whether we stand for something bigger," Samantha said. Her voice was steady, but filled with passion. "We're not asking for permission to live. We're asking for the chance to live together." The room went silent for a moment. Helen's face turned crimson, but she pressed on. "You've had your fun, Samantha, but the rules are the rules for a reason. Without them, we risk turning into a place where chaos reigns." Samantha shook her head, her gaze never leaving Helen's. "That's where you're wrong. Rules without kindness, without empathy, are just restrictions. A community that isn't allowed to grow, to change, isn't really a community. It's just a collection of houses. The tension in the room was palpable. You could feel the years of resentment, frustration, and fear bubble to the surface. And yet, for the first time, it felt like the community was ready to choose something new. The vote was called. In the end, it wasn't even close. The town overwhelmingly voted to keep the changes in place. The bylaws were rewritten. The events would continue, as with the spirit of inclusion and joy. And with this new vote came the confirmation that the old guard's vision of conformity was no longer the future of Maple Hollow. Samantha walked out of that meeting knowing that something irrevocable had changed, not just in the HOA or in the bylaws, but in the hearts of everyone who had shown up to fight for what they believed in. The days following the vote were filled with a mixture of relief, celebration, and a renewed sense of purpose. It was clear now that the tides had irrevocably shifted in Maple Hollow. The community had spoken, and the message was loud and clear. They were ready to embrace change, creativity, and individuality. The era of rigid bylaws and oppressive control had come to an end. In its place, a new chapter of possibility and collaboration began. Samantha found herself busier than ever, but she wasn't just managing events anymore. She had become the heartbeat of the community, a symbol of the collective will of Maple Hollow to be better, to live with intention, and to support each other in the process. The first project on the agenda was the new community garden. The idea had been floated during the last meeting, and the town had rallied behind it. Now it was becoming a reality. With a mix of old-timers, young families, and everyone in between, they broke ground on the garden. The space was going to be located right in the center of the neighborhood, near the community center, a place where everyone could come together to grow their own food, share harvests, and build relationships. The vision was clear: food security, sustainability, and community solidarity. Samantha, with her sleeves rolled up and a trowel in her hand, led the charge. It was nothing like the clean lines of the lawns they used to see in the neighborhood. The community garden was going to be full of colors, textures, and a patchwork of organic growth. No longer would people be judged for their gardening mistakes or told to remove their unruly plantings. The idea was to create something truly alive, something that embraced the messiness of nature. As the weeks passed, the garden began to take shape. People donated seeds, plants, and tools. Local businesses offered discounts on materials, and several residents offered to host free gardening workshops. The town had never felt more connected, and there was a true sense of pride as the garden blossomed before their eyes. But the journey wasn't without its bumps. As expected, a few of the more traditional residents, those who had supported Margaret and the old regime, continued to grumble. Some still couldn't understand the vision behind a garden that didn't follow the perfectly manicured standards they were accustomed to. They found fault with the raised beds, the scattered flowers, and even the bees that had started to appear. Helen Fox, who had quietly accepted defeat at the last meeting, made an appearance at the garden one afternoon. She was wearing a floral print blouse, which was unlike her usual stiff attire, and she walked hesitantly between the rows of growing vegetables. Samantha noticed her, but she didn't approach immediately. She wanted to see what Helen would do. After a few minutes, Helen turned and made her way toward Samantha. "I never thought I'd see the day when Maple Hollow's lawn was a garden," Helen said with a slight chuckle. Samantha smiled and wiped the sweat from her brow. "Funny, isn't it? But I think it's exactly what we needed." Helen hesitated, clearly weighing her words. "I still don't get it. The rules were there for a reason. They kept everything neat, tidy, and orderly." Samantha nodded. "I know, but I don't think we've lost order. We've just found a new kind of order, a kind that doesn't smother creativity or life." For the first time, Helen's stern face softened. She looked at the rows of thriving vegetables and the bees buzzing around the flowers. And for the first time, she saw what everyone else had been seeing: the beauty of imperfection. The garden was wild, messy, and untamed in all the best ways. "I guess you're right," Helen said quietly. "Maybe I've been too focused on keeping everything the same." Samantha patted her on the back. "You're welcome here. You're part of Maple Hollow, too." It was a turning point, small but significant. Helen's begrudging acceptance of the garden was a sign that the community was starting to heal. The fissures between the old and new ways were beginning to close, and there was a growing understanding that they didn't need to choose between the two. The community could thrive on its own terms. The next big project was a neighborhood-wide mural, another idea that had been kicked around during the summer festival. The mural was going to be painted on the side of the community center and would showcase the story of Maple Hollow, its founding, its growth, its challenges, and most importantly, its unity. Local artists and residents came together to design it, and in a show of solidarity, everyone was invited to contribute a small section of a mural. Children, teenagers, adults, and seniors all joined in to add their touch to the masterpiece. As the mural came to life, so did Maple Hollow. It wasn't just about the artwork. It was about the act of creating something beautiful together. It was a reflection of the community's commitment to building a place that was vibrant, diverse, and full of possibility. By the time fall arrived, Maple Hollow had become something entirely new, a place where traditions were respected, but innovation was embraced, a place where community came before conformity, a place where people didn't just live next to each other. They lived with each other. And through it all, Samantha had never felt more at home. Her vision was no longer just a dream. It was a living, breathing reality. The future of Maple Hollow was bright. And as she stood before the completed mural, with the sun setting behind her, Samantha knew this was only the beginning. There were still many projects to come, more changes to embrace, more challenges to face. But for the first time in years, the future felt certain, because the community was ready, and together they could do anything